All right, if you'll turn in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 12. We kind of broke new ground last week on this, starting this chapter, and just kind of barely got started. And so I'll just recap a little bit and cover a few more things about the Sabbath. It says, at that time Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto him, Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath. But he said unto them, Have ye not read what David did when he was hungry, and they that were with him, how they entered into the house of God and did eat the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them which were with him, but only the priest? Or have you not read in the law how that on the Sabbath days the priest in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? And I say unto you, that in this place is greater than the temple. But if ye had known what this meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is the Lord even of the Sabbath day. We talked just momentarily about the Sabbath last week, and so I'll spend a little more time today discussing the mindset, if you will, of the religious world at that time of the Jews. Okay, the Sabbath was at the very heart of Jewish religion, and at the very heart of their legalistic system. And you have to understand the legalistic system of the Jews at this point that we're reading had gone way beyond the law that God had given, and they had heaped many traditions of their own that the rabbis along the way through the centuries had added to the law. And so with that being said, when Jesus did what he and his disciples plucked this corn and were eating it, they perceived him to have been violating the law, and it struck a nerve with them. Okay, it was a serious deal to them. The word Sabbath in the Hebrew and the Greek means to cease or to rest or to be inactive. Okay, it goes all the way back to the book of Genesis in chapter 2 and verse 3. It says, And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all the work which God had created and made. So in honor of God's day of rest, he declared that the last day of the week, the Sabbath day, would be the Sabbath day, a special time of rest as well as a special time of remembrance for his people, remembering his creation and all that he had done. And of the 10 commandments, the fourth commandment is remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Out of all 10 commandments, that's the only commandment that had nothing to do with behavioral issues. It was a non-moral commandment. It just simply dealt with the spiritual observance of the Sabbath day. Keep in mind what we're reading here, the setting of what we're reading here with Jesus and his disciples was before Christ's redemptive work. Okay, so that means they were still, at this time of the writing, was still under the old covenant. It was still very much in effect, and all the requirements of the law were still binding. Back in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 17, Jesus said, I have come to fulfill the law and not destroy it. So Jesus is not about to break the law, okay? He's not about to violate the law at all. He's very much in compliance with the law in what he's doing with his disciples. He was just in violation of their traditions. And that's, in their eyes, that was the law. But in reality, they were only traditions. So remember, those were added to, these regulations were added to God's law to such an extent and to such a ridiculous degree that actually, in many cases, they contradicted God's law. They disannulled, if you will, some of the things God had to say. And so nowhere were these traditions any more evident than with the fourth commandment, that of keeping the Sabbath. Instead of being a day of rest, it had turned into, God intended it for a day of rest and remembrance. And that was his intention. It had turned in, they had really created a day of burden, because people, with the hundreds of man-made restrictions added to God's fourth commandment, trying just to try to stay in compliance was stressful. Just to try to understand what they could do and what they could not do was more wearisome and more tiresome than had they just went to work on that day. And so it was, let me just give you a few examples, and these are interesting to me, and it just kind of gives us an example, an idea of what their mindset was. The Apocrypha book of First Maccabees, I've never read it, but if you're familiar with the Apocrypha, you'll recognize that name, tells of one incident where a group of Jews refused to defend themselves or to secure any kind of hiding place or anything when the Greeks came against them violently. They basically, because it was a Sabbath day, refused to protect themselves or even refused to try to hide from the danger, and basically were overtaken and many of them slaughtered because it's the day of rest in their mind, okay? That's not at all the ideal that God had intended for the fourth commandment. The Talmud, if you're not familiar with that, the Talmud was a very voluminous collection of writings that the rabbis had put together over years and years and years. These regulations and these traditions and these new rules that we're talking about were all bound up in the Talmud. The Talmud was an ongoing, again, voluminous collection of these things. And as they went, they were added century after century. It got bigger and bigger. And there were a full 24 chapters that were devoted to just the Sabbath day laws regarding, God's one commandment of honor the Sabbath. And so that 24 chapters, you can imagine. And so let's just give you a few of the ridiculous examples. And there were hundreds of them, okay? And these are just a few. And I give these to you to help paint a mental picture of just how narrow-minded the religious Jews of Jesus' day had become as a result of this Talmud. And also just how foolish man can be in his attempt to try to establish his own righteousness. There's just no limit to the foolishness when man tries to start figuring out ways that he can be right before God apart from grace, okay? 1, travel. A person was forbidden to travel more than 3,000 feet away from his home. If, this is how ridiculous it gets, if there was a source of food, say maybe you had a storehouse that was within 3,000 feet of your home, and you needed that food, well then you could go that 3,000 feet to the storehouse, and then you were allowed another 3,000 feet beyond that, because that was an extension of the house because of the food was there, just stuff like that. You couldn't carry anything heavier than a fig. You couldn't eat anything larger than an olive. And again, these contradict themselves along the way. At one point, you can't eat anything more than an olive, but then they talk about traveling 3,000 feet to a storehouse. Well, I'm not going to walk 3,000 feet for an olive, are you? Not at all. So, it's, again, just to continue, it's just so bizarre. A tailor could not carry a needle with them on the Sabbath day, lest they be tempted to stop and do some work. And so a fire could not be lit or extinguished. And I read today when I was working on this that till today, some Jews put their lighting on timers to go on and off at the right times of the day on the Sabbath, because they won't regulate their lighting because it would be violating the Sabbath. Now, how strict a sect of Jews today would be, I don't know. There probably wouldn't be very many, but that's what I read. Baths could not be taken, which they're only supposed to be taken on Saturday anyway, right? So baths, whether you need it or not, baths could not be taken on the Sabbath for fear that some water might spill on the floor and that would be considered washing the floor. A woman could not look in the mirror lest she see a gray hair and be tempted to pull it out. So you could carry enough ink to be able to write 2 letters of the alphabet. These are literal laws written in the Talmud for the Jews, okay? If a person fell ill on the Sabbath, they could receive only enough treatment to keep them alive. But any treatment done to heal them or improve them was considered work, so it was forbidden. So you didn't want to get sick on the Sabbath day, okay? You could not untie a knot on the Sabbath day. So again, these are examples, the 24 chapters of them in the Talmud, okay? And these are just portions of it. And again, they were just, many of them just contradicted themselves. They contradicted God's word. They were just, most of them were just very foolish. And so this is the sort of thing that framed the mind of the religious Jew in Jesus' day. These are the sort of idiocies that contaminated their religious minds. And I don't mean to make light of God's people. The Jews are God's people, okay? And I don't mean to poke fun, but this is the facts. Even Jesus called it what it was, what they had come to. Well-meaning, many of them, okay? Some of them weren't, obviously, but many of them were well-meaning, thought they were pleasing God with these sort of things, okay? And so when the Jews, when Jesus and his disciples walked through that cornfield and they plucked that corn and ate it that day, that was considered a violation of the law, but really it was only a violation of their traditions. It wasn't a violation of the law. And we can see just how hair-splitting their regulations were, because think about the fact that they themselves and Jesus and his disciples are in a cornfield. What are the chances are that probably some of them are over 3,000 feet away from their home, right? But they don't say anything about that because they could be very flexible with the rules when it was convenient to be and they wanted to be, and then they could be very narrow with the rules when it fit their agenda. And of course, attacking Jesus fit their agenda. Jesus says over in Matthew 23 and verse 24, he told them, he said, you strain at a gnat and you swallow a camel. And that was this exact point. You know, right now, this law of plucking the corn or tradition, we're going to enforce that, or we're going to call you on it, okay? When in reality, we're probably all walked too far away from our homes to be out here to start with, okay? So make no mistake about it. This was an opportunity to come against Jesus. It fit their agenda, and Jesus has not violated the law in the least. The law did forbid reaping on the Sabbath. You can read about it in Deuteronomy. You can read all of the actual laws, okay? But it was speaking of reaping in the sense of going to the field with the intent to harvest, regular reaping, harvest time reaping, okay? To walk through the fields on your way somewhere and to pluck corn and eat it is not considered reaping. And in fact, the Bible makes provision for people to do that. It talks about it in Deuteronomy chapter 23 that they could, when they were traveling from one place to the other, it was very common in their days for that to carry them from maybe through somebody's field, maybe through somebody's pasture, maybe through a vineyard, a garden, or anything along those lines, because it was a very agriculture-related society, okay? Public roads, as we know them, were very, very few. They were basically paths from point A to point B. So they cut across people's land everywhere they went. And the Bible makes allowance in Deuteronomy chapter 23 for when you are traveling on the Sabbath day to be able to eat of your neighbor's crops, or any day of the week for that matter. You could eat of your neighbor's crop. It was lawful. The only thing you were not able to do was gather excess, if you will. Like if you're going through there and filling your pockets or your basket, then that would be a violation of the law. You're basically stealing from your neighbor, and that was forbidden. But because of the nature of things, God allowed for, hey, you're traveling through my vineyard and you grab some grapes and you're satisfying your hunger. That's lawful. There's nothing wrong with that, okay? And so Jesus was very much in compliance with the law, God's law, in this situation. And it just was fitting their agenda to call him on one of their traditions, okay? So this was the kind of scrutiny, if you will, that Jesus would be under from this day forward with the religious Jews, okay? They perceive themselves to be the spiritual police, and now Jesus has he's on their beat, so to speak. They're going to start picking him apart, and so this marks a really major turning point in the Lord's ministry, his earthly ministry. From this point forward, we're going to begin to see more and more opposition to Jesus. Up until here, we haven't seen much, okay? Going forward, they're going to become more hostile towards him. They're going to oppose him more. They're going to eventually start becoming more hostile. And then finally, we know ultimately they reject him altogether and crucify him. We see that towards the end of the Gospels, okay? But along the way, business is going to start picking up here as far as antagonism towards the Messiah, okay? And so that's what we're dealing with the Sabbath. Next time we're together, we'll move on and see what Jesus, his words, when he describes about David and his men when they ate of the showbread during the Sabbath, okay? All right, let's stand and we'll be dismissed. I hope you have a good remainder of the week. Look forward to seeing you back here Sunday. Please pray for these people that have been mentioned. Pray for rain. And let's go ahead and be dismissed. Royce, will you lead us, please, sir?